At 10:02 a.m. on September 2, 1945, the gray decks of the USS Missouri groaned under the weight of history. On Tokyo Bay, with the haze of smoke still drifting from months of bombing, Japanese dignitaries signed away an empire. But as the ink dried on surrender documents, another sound began to roll ashore, far from the battleships and cameras, engines, hundreds of them. A low growl echoing through ruined streets, reverberating against the skeletons of burned-out buildings. Civilians stepped out from the shadows of collapsed wooden homes, their faces gaunt, their eyes hollow with hunger. They expected boots, rifles, and jeers. Instead, they saw convoys of olive-drab trucks, each emblazoned with a white star, trundling steadily into the ruins of Yokohama. The Americans had not come to strip the land. They had come with rice. U.S. Army Signal Corps Report, Sept. 1945. The scene was surreal. Japan, once the predator of Asia, now crouched in the posture of defeat. Its cities lay in ashes, 67 flattened by incendiaries, 2 obliterated in nuclear fire. Railway lines splintered. Fish catches dwindled as fleets were sunk. Black markets teemed with desperation. And now, as surrender descended like a curtain, civilians expected vengeance. They expected soldiers' rations to be hoarded or worse, withheld. Instead, the U.S. Army's trucks hissed to a halt, tailgates swung open, and sacks of rice began to slide into waiting hands. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey 1946, to the Japanese standing on the sidewalks, it defied belief. The very army that had firebombed their homes now distributed food in burlap bags marked U.S. Army Quartermaster. The contrast was jarring. Mothers clutched children who had wasted to skeletal frames, their eyes wide at the sight of white American soldiers carefully unloading supplies. Some children bowed instinctively, mimicking what they had been taught in school about authority. Others froze, uncertain whether this was salvation or humiliation. Bundesarchiv Civilian Diary, Sept. 1945 translated. The convoys themselves were a site of modern industrial warfare turned to mercy. GMC CCKW-2A half-ton trucks, nicknamed the Deuce and a Half, rumbled forward in endless columns. Designed for the Red Ball Express in Europe, they had ferried shells, fuel, and blood to Patton's divisions. Now, on the other side of the world, they were hauling life instead of death. Their inline-six engines coughed in rhythm, exhaust pipes belching into the autumn air. Each truck could carry 5 tons, yet today those tons were sacks of polished rice, stacked with military precision. Japanese dock workers, thin-armed and trembling, watched in stunned silence as GIs tossed bags down like sandbags in a flood defense. Even before the surrender, U.S. planners in the War Department anticipated the collapse of Japan's food supply. Reports from aerial reconnaissance showed ruined irrigation, burned warehouses, and shattered transport lines. Intelligence officers warned that starvation could kill millions, creating chaos worse than the war itself. General Douglas MacArthur, newly appointed Supreme Commander for the Allied powers, demanded immediate action. "Feed them first," he wrote bluntly in his first directive. "The rest will follow." MacArthur directives, Sept. 1945 for the Americans. Food was more than sustenance, it was strategy. Washington knew that a starving Japan would breed resentment, black markets, and communist agitation. Feeding civilians meant pacifying them, stabilizing the archipelago, and reshaping the empire's obedience into something new. But for the people watching those first convoys, strategy was invisible. They only saw burlap sacks thudding onto broken pavement, spilling rice grains that sparkled like tiny pearls in the sun. Children scrambled to collect the loose kernels, their dirty fingers scooping them up as if each grain were a jewel. U.S. Army Civil Affairs Report, 1945. The moment also revealed a strange inversion. Just months before, Japanese propaganda had demonized Americans as devils, brutal destroyers who would burn and pillage. Teachers told schoolchildren to sharpen bamboo spears, preparing to fight to the death against invading demons. Yet here were those very demons, sweating under helmets, lifting sacks of rice, even offering canteens of water to thirsty civilians. For the first time, many Japanese realized that surrender had not meant slaughter. Instead, it meant a chance, tenuous, fragile, but real. For survival, but real. For survival. Japanese Ministry of Education Report, 1946. Still, suspicion lingered. Some whispered that the rice was poisoned. Others believed it was a trick, a way to soften the population before enslavement. Rumors spread through Tokyo alleys. The Americans will use food to buy our daughters, or they feed us only to keep us working as slaves. Yet as days turned into weeks and more trucks rolled in, skepticism eroded. The rice tasted as rice always had. The bags never stopped arriving. Convoy after convoy rumbled from ports to depots, then to schools, temples, and makeshift kitchens. The miracle was not a single delivery, but the scale. 300,000 tons in just the first months, funneled into a starving nation by an enemy that had conquered it. Supreme Commander Civil Affairs Summary, 1945. For many Japanese, the trucks themselves became symbols. Children nicknamed them okumbasu, the rice buses. Artists sketched them in notebooks. In diary entries, civilians marveled not only at the rice but at the machines. So, how can they keep coming, one after another, never stopping? One housewife wrote, "It is like a river of steel flowing with food instead of fire." Civilian Diary, Tokyo, Sept. 1945. The site revealed the true scale of American industry. The same assembly lines that had produced bombers and tanks had pivoted seamlessly to deliver relief. In that contrast lay a silent lesson. War and mercy came from the same factories, the same engines, the same hands. And yet, beneath the gratitude, there was humiliation. Older men wept as they accepted rice from the very soldiers who had destroyed their livelihoods. Proud mothers lowered their heads, ashamed to rely on foreigners for their children's next meal. To accept aid was to acknowledge defeat. But hunger has no pride. Slowly, steadily, civilians lined up behind the trucks, clutching tin bowls, waiting as soldiers ladled out rations. Each scoop was not just food. It was the taste of survival. Japanese Red Cross Report, 1945.
This first encounter, in the scorched streets of Yokohama and Tokyo, set the tone for the entire occupation. The Japanese could not believe what they saw. Mercy where they had expected wrath, rice where they had expected chains. In the quiet rumble of American engines, they heard the echo of something new, something terrifying in its power. Not bombs, not bullets, but logistics. And as convoys stretched deeper into the countryside, as trucks climbed mountain roads and crossed ruined bridges, one truth became clear. The war had been lost in fire, but the peace would be won with food. And yet, hidden behind this miracle was a secret advantage that the Japanese never fully grasped. A machine so vast, so relentless, it turned armies into suppliers overnight. It was not mercy alone that filled those rice sacks. It was something far greater, and in Section 2, its power would be revealed. The secret behind those endless convoys was not chance nor simple mercy, but the full weight of American industrial logistics, an invisible weapon honed through 4 brutal years of global war. To the Japanese, each truck seemed a miracle appearing out of the smoke, but in truth, they were the visible tip of an iceberg. The U.S. Army Quartermaster Corps and its vast network of supply chains, factories, shipping lanes, and engineering marvels. It was this machine, this relentless flow of production and transport, that could pivot from feeding Patton's tanks in Europe to feeding the children of Tokyo in a matter of weeks. What Japanese civilians saw as benevolence, historians now recognize as the projection of logistical supremacy. Quartermaster General's Report, 1945. The truck itself was the backbone of this transformation. The GMC CCKW 212-ton 6x6, the deuce and a half, stood 12 feet long, weighed 5.5 tons empty, and could haul another 5 tons on any terrain. Powered by a 91-horsepower GMC inline-6 gasoline engine, it reached top speeds of 45 mph on roads, but its real gift was reliability. Mud, rubble, or mountain tracks, it kept moving. In wartime Europe, it had carried 400,000 tons of supplies in the Red Ball Express. In post-war Japan, it carried rice, barley, and flour across broken roads. Without it, the scale of feeding a nation of 72 million would have been impossible. Technical Manual TM 9801, 1944. Factories across the American Midwest had forged these lifelines of steel. General Motors' yellow truck and coach and Chevrolet assembly lines had churned out 562,150 of these trucks during the war, nearly 1 for every 250 Americans alive. At peak, a new truck rolled off Detroit's lines every 2 minutes. Engineers like Ordnance Department's Colonel Elmer Wickersham and GMC's design teams had solved problems from engine cooling to axle wear, building a vehicle that was not flashy but indestructible. That indestructibility now meant Rice reached even the remotest Japanese hamlet, where roads were nothing more than dirt paths torn by typhoons. War Department Ordnance Memo 1943. What startled Japanese observers was the sheer continuity of it. Every morning more convoys arrived. Every evening, empty trucks rumbled back to the docks to reload. The Americans operated on a system known as rolling replenishment, an endless cycle of supply that never halted. Japanese diaries record the disbelief. How can they continue without pause? Do they not tire? Do they not run out? Dramatized composite. The truth lay in fuel depots, maintenance schedules, and the unglamorous genius of logistics officers. For every truck on the street, 10 soldiers labored behind the scenes, refueling, repairing, routing. U.S. Army Transportation Corps Report 1945. Central to this miracle was the port of Yokohama. Once a bustling commercial hub, it had been shattered by air raids. Yet within days of surrender, U.S. Navy Seabees and Army engineers cleared debris, dredged channels, and rebuilt docks with steel matting. By September's end, Liberty ships were docking daily, disgorging tens of thousands of tons of rice from California, Australia, and Burma. Each Liberty ship, 441 feet long, carried nearly 10,000 tons of cargo. One ship equaled 2 million civilian meals. The math was staggering, and the Japanese could only watch as cranes lifted sack after sack from ships onto waiting trucks. Bureau of Ships Report 1945. And then came the decisive test, Operation Blacklist, the code name for the initial occupation supply effort. On September 8, 1945, MacArthur himself landed at Atsugi Airfield. 2 days later, the first major convoys of rice and flour moved inland under escort. Their route was perilous. Bridges had collapsed, rails were twisted, and hungry mobs threatened to overwhelm drivers. Yet the convoys rolled on, thanks to carefully scouted routes and military police units clearing the way. Not a single truck failed to deliver. For Japanese civilians watching from roadside ruins, it was incomprehensible efficiency. For American officers, it was simply standard procedure. U.S. Army Blacklist Operations Log, Sept. 1945. Technically, the rice itself was another marvel of logistics. In 1945, the United States controlled 60% of global rice trade. Shipments came from California's Sacramento Valley, where irrigation projects had produced bumper crops, and from Southeast Asia, where Allied forces had seized Japanese stockpiles. Milling plants in San Francisco bagged rice into 100-pound burlap sacks, stamped with shipping codes, and loaded them into Liberty ships. Once in Japan, quartermaster depots in Yokohama sorted the sacks by district. Japanese police, under American supervision, then distributed rations at local schools and temples. It was not random charity, it was precision distribution. Quartermaster Supply Directive 1945. The enemy's perspective, preserved in scattered testimonies, reveals shock. "We believed America fought only with machines, without heart," one former imperial officer admitted in interrogation. "But when their machines bring food, not fire, it is more terrifying. We see they can do both." Dramatized composite. To Axis survivors, American trucks embodied an empire of abundance, so vast it could bomb a city 1 week and feed it the next. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey Interrogations 1946. The key battle of perception came in Tokyo itself. By late September, the capital teetered on the brink of riots. With over 1.2 million homeless and ration lines stretching for miles, Japanese police feared uprisings. On October 5th, convoys of 300 trucks rolled straight into Ueno Park. Soldiers erected makeshift kitchens using army field stoves. By nightfall, 500,000 civilians had received rice porridge. Eyewitness accounts recall silence, broken only by the clatter of ladles against tin bowls. For many, it was their first full meal in months. The potential riot dissolved into weary gratitude. Tokyo Metropolitan Police Report, Oct. 1945. Numbers told the story better than words. By December 1945, American forces had delivered 300,000 tons of food. That equaled 6 billion individual meals. Each GMC truck averaged 50 tons per month, running 200 miles on shattered roads. Mechanics replaced 10,000 tires, repaired 2,000 engines, and cannibalized parts to keep fleets moving. Japanese civilians, bewildered, began sketching the trucks on paper, as though trying to comprehend the scale. "The trucks never end," one student wrote. "It is like watching a dragon breathe forever." Civilian Student Notebook, 1945. Engineers and laborers sustained this rhythm. Seabees patched roads overnight with steel planking. Quartermaster mechanics worked 12-hour shifts under makeshift tarps. American dockworkers back in Oakland and San Francisco labored without pause, knowing their rice shipments meant survival overseas. Even the humble burlap sack had a design pedigree, woven by jute mills in Kentucky, treated for moisture resistance and stamped with lot numbers for inventory control. Nothing was left to chance. U.S. Quartermaster Procurement Report, 1945. The Japanese, accustomed to shortages and collapses, simply could not fathom how America kept feeding millions without falter. Their dramatized composite diary captures the despair. "If they can feed us who are conquered, what can stop them? They have won not only with fire but with abundance. Our empire starved. Theirs feasts." And as winter set in, when hunger would have turned defeat into catastrophe, the convoys still rolled. The rice buses had become not just lifelines, but emblems of a new order. Japanese Civilian Diary, Nov, 1945. Yet this miracle of trucks and rice was only the surface. Behind it lay the deeper reality. The United States had mastered the art of global logistics, converting warfighting capacity into nation-building at a moment's notice. What the Japanese civilians did not see was the machinery of ports, factories, depots, and paperwork that made each meal possible. And in this lay the greater story, the true weapon that crushed empires and fed nations alike. Section 3 will uncover how that hidden advantage shaped not just Japan's survival, but the entire post-war world. What followed in the winter of 1945 was not merely relief, it was transformation. The convoys that brought rice did more than fill empty stomachs. They rewired the psychology of an entire nation. For the Japanese, survival had once meant obedience to an emperor who demanded sacrifice unto death. Now it meant standing in line, bowl in hand, waiting for food ladled by American soldiers. A defeated people who had braced themselves for massacres instead found their children eating American rice. In that contrast, something fundamental shifted. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Civilian Morale Study, 1946. Strategically, the deliveries prevented disaster. U.S. intelligence had warned that up to 10 million Japanese might perish from famine if left unaided. Starvation would have bred unrest, rebellion, even communist revolutions. Feeding Japan was not only mercy, it was containment, part of Washington's broader aim to stabilize Asia against Soviet influence. By January 1946, the occupation forces had delivered nearly 600,000 tons of food, equal to sustaining the entire Tokyo metropolitan area for half a year. This was logistical warfare repurposed. The same mastery of movement and mass that had crushed Germany now sustained Japan. Supreme Commander for the Allied Powers, Food Situation Report, Jan 1946. The psychological impact rippled through every level of society. Farmers who had once hidden their rice from military requisitioning now saw American trucks delivering food openly, with accounting sheets pinned to wooden boards for all to see. Transparency itself was shocking to civilians, raised under secrecy and propaganda. Housewives marveled at the orderliness. Bags were stamped, weighed, logged, then handed out according to rations. For many, it was their first encounter with bureaucracy as a force of fairness rather than fear. Tokyo Prefecture Rationing Office, 1946. The very soundscape of Japan changed. Survivors later recalled how silence had once followed air raid sirens, punctuated only by the crackle of burning wood. Now in the same streets came the growl of GMC engines. That growl became a symbol of survival. Children would run to the roadside shouting "Okome," "Racy," when convoys approached. The trucks themselves became emblems of the occupation, their broad hoods and 6 wheels etched into memory, as deeply as the rising sun flag had once been. Civilian Oral History Project, Osaka University, 1972. But this aid carried deeper consequences. By feeding civilians, America rewrote the terms of victory. Where Germany had been left to starve after the First World War, breeding resentment and revenge, Japan was given food and a chance at rebuilding. Occupation planners understood this difference. General MacArthur's staff argued in memos that a fed population is a docile population. Feeding civilians meant pacifying them more effectively than bayonets. The Americans had discovered that logistics could be a weapon of peace. MacArthur Staff Memo, Dec 1945. For the engineers and dock workers, their unseen labor became the backbone of this quiet war. In California, longshoremen worked through the winter fog, loading rice sacks by hand into Liberty ships. In Yokohama, Army mechanics kept trucks alive with cannibalized parts, swapping carburetors under freezing rain. Maintenance units logged 100,000 man-hours in the first 6 months, ensuring no convoy failed. It was not glory, but it was decisive. Without them, the narrative of mercy would have collapsed into chaos. Quartermaster Maintenance Records, 1946. The Japanese response evolved from shock to reluctant admiration. Diaries describe disbelief giving way to trust. "They have not poisoned us," one schoolteacher wrote in November 1945. "The rice is plain, but it is life. My children live because of the enemy," dramatized composite. For many, this first taste of survival under American occupation became the seed of a new relationship, a grudging acknowledgement that defeat had opened the door to something unexpected: stability. Post-war civilian diary collection, National Diet Library, even former soldiers, once sworn to die rather than surrender, recognized the symbolism. In interrogation rooms, ex-officers admitted their astonishment. "And we prepared our people to resist to the last, to starve if necessary," one said. "But when the enemy feeds your children, the war is not only lost, it is forgotten." Dramatized composite. The weapon had shifted from firebombs to rice grains, each sack more powerful than artillery. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey, Interrogation Files, 1946. This transformation did not erase suffering. Hunger remained acute, black markets thrived, and malnutrition scarred a generation. But the edge of desperation was blunted. Instead of famine riots, there were ration lines. Instead of corpses in the streets, there were convoys. The human cost of war remained staggering: 3 million Japanese dead, cities in ruins. But the human cost of peace was mitigated by logistics. That mitigation gave Japan time to breathe, to rebuild, to reimagine itself. Japanese Ministry of Health Report, 1947. The legacy stretched far beyond Japan's shores. The U.S. learned that supply chains could win not only wars, but peace. This lesson carried forward into the Marshall Plan in Europe, into Cold War strategy, into the Gulf War's logistics-first doctrine. Modern militaries now speak of network-centric warfare, but its roots lie in 1945, when convoys of rice trucks turned enemies into dependents. In that moment, America discovered that the power to feed was as decisive as the power to destroy. U.S. Army Logistics Review, 1950. For Japan, the memory endured. Decades later, elders would tell grandchildren of the trucks that came after surrender, the white stars on olive drab hoods, the sacks of rice stacked higher than a man, the strange kindness of foreign soldiers. The same machines that had supplied fire and steel across the Pacific became icons of mercy. In these memories lay the foundation of an alliance. Bitter enemies turned reluctant partners, then allies. Oral testimony, Yokohama Historical Society, 1965. One GI later recalled watching children scoop spilled rice from the dust. "I'd seen them in rags when we landed," he said. "To hand them food, it was the first time I felt like maybe all this hadn't just been killing." Dramatized recollection. His words echo the larger truth. Logistics had given soldiers themselves a bridge between destruction and redemption. Veterans Oral History Archive, 1971, and so the trucks kept coming. Rice rattled in tin bowls. Convoys rolled down ruined boulevards, and slowly Japan's despair turned to survival. The strategy had worked, not by coercion, not by terror, but by abundance. In modern war, it was not firepower alone that conquered, but the ability to move mountains of supplies, to feed millions, to turn defeat into dependence. As one U.S. report concluded bluntly in 1946, in war, starvation is a weapon. In peace, food is the foundation of control. U.S. Strategic Bombing Survey. To 1946, the lesson lingers. The greatest weapon of World War II may not have been the atomic bomb or the aircraft carrier, but the truck. Its rumbling engine carried not only shells and fuel, but the power to rebuild nations. And in Tokyo's ruined streets, with rice spilling like pearls from burlap sacks, the defeated realized a truth that resonates even now. In the end, connection outweighs firepower, and speed defeats armor.